Sveiki! Ar žinote, kodėl ši žiema Lietuvoje tokia šalta ir ar prie to prisidėjo žmonių veikla? Kodėl kai kurie žmonės gali nubėgti maratoną ir ką tai turi bendro su bakterijomis? Kodėl kartais atlikdami kokį fizinį veiksmą, kaip pavyzdžiui atsistodami ar atsisėsdami, išleidžiame atodūsį? Dr.Karl arba Dr. Karlas jau 40 metų tyrinėja įvairiausias mokslo šakas, o jo vizitinė kortelė yra klausimų ir atsakymų apie mokslo laidas, kokia yra ir ši. Šiandien jau trečią kartą atsakinėsime jūsų ar jūsų vaikų klausimus, tai labai raginu daryti viso eterio metu Delfi Facebook paskyroje. Ir nieko nelaukusi pristatau Karl. Hi, so wonderful to have you back in Vilnius. Are you ready for some action?
Very ready and lovely to be back again. And to make you jealous, this morning I went for a swim in the Pacific Ocean. Oh, I'm sorry you're so cold.
Oh my God, we are freezing in Vilnius. But you have just published your 46th book and it looks like this. And you have been working on your 47th. And Karl, where do you get ideas for your books? And this particular book, your newly published book, has holograms in it as well that our viewers can actually see now in their screens.
Yes, it's like the old-fashioned cardboard pop-ups, but this is electronic. So every story has a hologram in it, perhaps a little bit like Princess Leia in Star Wars. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you are my only salvation. Now I want to put that in the next one. And so in the story about how dead fish and dead whales can swim after they're dead against the current, so a fish can swim upstream against the current, then you can see me talking about it, and then if you press one of the buttons with your finger on your phone at the bottom of the hologram of me floating in the air, you can see a movie of a fish that's been dead for several hours and it's swimming upstream against the current. Oh my God. So the holograms are like a book within a book. There's more stuff there, more words than there are in the actual book. But of course, you can read it as a regular old-fashioned book and not have to use your smartphone at all.
Yes, and I would recommend to do that. You can buy it online. It's an amazing book. And aš dar kartą raginu visus užduoti klausimus Dr. Karl gyvai Delfi Facebook paskyroje. And Karl, we have so many questions that were sent in by our viewers, by children and by adults as well. And my first question for you is, why do bees sting?
They sting to protect their sister, to protect their hive. And this is how a beehive operates. There is a beehive. There is one queen who is giving birth to babies all day, roughly several times her own body weight. She is the only fertile female. There's a few hundred males who are fertile, who will at some stage have babies with her, and once they've done their job, they're thrown out of the nest to die. They're not needed anymore. And then there are thousands and thousands of females who are sterile and who cannot have babies. They exist in many social classes: workers, nursery feeders, soldiers, etc. And the ones that are the soldiers, they have a sting that they will attack an invader with, and the sting is connected all the way into their body, into their gut, and it has its own blood supply and muscle and nerve.
Wow.
And so when she stings you, she can't just pull out, because otherwise she rips out her guts and she dies. They can, if you do it properly, you can unscrew them out and then they won't die. But if you just pull them straight out, the sting will keep on pumping away and she'll die. And I do not know if this will translate into Lithuanian, but the only way that she can make her genes, her DNA, go into the future is by protecting her sister, the queen. So she takes a dive for the hive, and dive and hive rhyme, and to take a dive in English means she makes a sacrifice.
Oh.
And so that's a little English language joke that probably does not translate into Lithuanian, I'm sorry.
But that's kind of sad that the bee dies, because bees are good for Earth, aren't they? We need bees.
Yes. Every year, hundreds of thousands, millions of bees are shipped from one part of the world to the other. One of the biggest bee migrations is from all over America to California for the annual almond, A-L-M-O-N-D, a little nut about so big, fertilization. And it is thought that this can carry diseases from one part of the country to the other. And in some parts of China, the bees have been destroyed, and so the farmers have to fertilize their crops by hand with little brushes.
Oh, that seems a lot of hassle. And another question, how did the moon was formed? How was the moon formed, I mean, and does it have gravity?
I'll answer the second question first.
Yes.
Everything that has mass has gravity. My pencil has gravity, and the gravitational waves from this reach to the edge of the universe. And I can make a gravitational wave by accelerating it. If I hold it here constantly, no gravitational waves. But if I move it suddenly, there are tiny, tiny gravitational waves. If I get something really massive, like black holes, I can get big gravitational waves. So the moon has its own gravity. How was the moon formed? About 4.5 B4 billion years ago, there was the early Earth, and then something the size of Mars smashed into the Earth. Moving at about 20, 30 kilometres per second, the collision took about 40 minutes to happen. And then a whole lot of stuff was thrown into orbit and then cooled down. And within 100 million years, we had the moon. There might have been 2 moons formed that then coalesced to make one bigger moon. And then the moon gradually began to retreat away from the Earth. And at the moment, the moon is leaving the Earth, going away from the Earth at the rate of 4 meters every year. You see, the tides cause friction, and the energy equations in physics tell us that the moon has to move away at 4 meters per century. Now, this is some very important travel advice for you, Goda. Have you ever seen a total eclipse of the sun where the moon totally blocks out the sun, and in the middle of the day, suddenly it becomes black?
Yes,
have you ever seen it?
Only once when I was very, very small. I think these are very, very rare events, but of course it was like amazing. In the middle of the day, suddenly it goes dark for a couple of moments.
Yes, so here's the important advice. Make sure, audience, beloved audience, that you see a total eclipse of the sun as soon as possible, because the moon is moving away from the Earth, appearing smaller, and will soon not be able to cover the sun in only 50 million years. So make sure in the next 50 million years you travel to see a total eclipse of the sun, because after 50 million years from now, there won't be any more.
Only 15 million years, that's not a lot.
That's right. You've got to, well, we are expecting many of the younger people watching today
Yes, of
to
course.
be effectively immortal due to genetics, but we'll talk about that another time.
Yes, and I have another question for you. Actually, it's a topic that is surrounded by like many conspiracy theories and so on. Who built the Egyptian pyramids?
The Egyptians. We have very good... Okay, so there is a field of study at universities called mathematics, and there's another one called biology, and there's another field of study called Egyptology, where all they study is ancient Egypt, up to 5,000 years ago. And we have written records from 5,000 years of 20,000 workers being brought together in villages and then set to work, and they were paid for the work. And we have records of what they were fed and records of their diseases and their medical care and how they came in and moved out. Using very simple technology and 20,000 people and 100 years, you can build a pyramid. So the Egyptians built the pyramids.
That's a wonderful answer. Aš dar kartą primenu, kad galite Dr. Karl užduoti kokius tik norite klausimus apie mokslą, kas yra įdomu jums ar jūsų vaikams. And Karl, back to you. Another question from our younger audience. Do we know when the sun will burn out?
5 billion years. So at the moment, the sun is burning 620 million tons of hydrogen every second.
Wow.
Not 620, 620 million tons. And it turns it into 616 million tons of helium. The difference is 4 million tons a second. 1 million tons comes squirting out of the sun as what we call the solar wind. Charged particles like protons and electrons travelling at various speeds. And 3 million tons vanishes under Einstein's famous equation of E equals mc squared and gets turned into energy. Mm-hmm. So the amount of helium in the sun is slowly increasing. And for various reasons, that then means if you study the field called astrophysics, mm-hmm. that means that the sun will expand. About 1 billion years from now, the sun will be so hot for various reasons that life on Earth will be impossible, and because the temperature will be over 100 degrees centigrade and water will boil. Nothing to do with global warming, that's a completely separate thing. Mm. So in 1 billion years, the Earth will be too hot. In 5 billion years, the sun will actually expand and swallow up Mercury and Venus and maybe Earth and possibly Mars, and then the nuclear fires will go out and it will shrink down to its original size, 1.5 million kilometres, and then 100 times smaller, about 15,000 kilometres. And then it will be a star that we call a white dwarf. Mm-hmm. Some of the outer planets might still go around it. The inner planets will have vanished. It has a surface temperature of about 10,000 degrees, and it will survive on its trapped heat for billions of years, 20, 30 billion years. So in 5 million years from now, the sun might swallow the Earth, but definitely will swallow Mercury and Venus.
But, when you say numbers like millions and billions, it's really difficult to grasp of because we only live, as humans, we now live for only a couple of decades, and thinking of billions of years in the future is just mind-blowing. And we have another question. What would happen if the spinning speed of Earth increased?
The Earth is a ball, but it's not a perfectly even ball in terms of diameter. The distance from north to south, through the centre of the Earth, and through the equator is about 41, 42 kilometres wider. And so, if the Earth were to spin faster, over a period of millions of years, it would gradually increase. So instead of being 41 million kilometres wider, it would go to 42, 45, 50, 60, who knows. And the ocean would bulge as well. If the Earth were to do the opposite and stop spinning totally, mm-hmm. then the oceans would retreat by 8 kilometres away from the equator. So the water would go down by 8 kilometres. However, the deepest ocean on the equator is 5.5 roughly kilometres deep, so we would have a mountain range around the Earth, around 2.5 kilometres high. So if the Earth were to spin faster, you would get lighter at the equator, and over millions of years the Earth would expand at the equator.
Again, millions of years. But we have so many questions that were sent in by the audience prior to the show, and I look forward to asking them. So another question, why is it the coldest at dawn just before the sun rises?
When the sun is directly above you and there's no clouds, the sun delivers about half a kilowatt of heat to each square metre. But when the sun goes down, instead the heat goes out into space and the temperature drops, the ground gets colder. And then after, say, 12 hours or so, the sun just peaks up on the horizon, just a little bit. But that half a kilowatt of heat is not coming straight down onto 1 square metre, it's spread out over several hundred square metres. And as the sun rises higher and higher, it gradually gets more concentrated per small area. So the temperature keeps on dropping for about half an hour or so after the sun has peeped over the horizon before it starts to warm up. So it's actually just a little bit colder after the dawn.
Aš dar kartą primenu, kad galite užduoti savo klausimus Dr.Karl Delfi Facebook paskyroje, savo ar savo vaikų klausimus, tikrai pasinaudokite šitą neeilinę progą. And Karl, again, back to you. A lot of kids actually ask this question. They are interested in black holes. What do we know about black holes? What would happen if we, let's say, would go into a black hole, and what's inside a black hole?
Well, firstly, we are very sure that black holes actually exist, even though the nearest one is about 1,000 light years away.
Wow.
However, there is a mystery. As part of their life cycle, if a star is heavy enough, if it starts off, say, 20 times the mass of the sun, it will throw off some mass and then shrink down to a white dwarf, and then, because it's heavy enough, to a neutron star, and then down to a black hole. White dwarf, 15,000 kilometres. Neutron star, 20 kilometres. Black hole, 0. So a black hole is not small or very small or very, very small. It's even smaller than that. It has 0 size. The event horizon, which is the barrier, sort of an artificial barrier where the escape velocity is equal to the speed of light, and once you're inside it, you can't get out. The event horizon has a size. If our sun got turned into a black hole, it couldn't. But if it did, it would have an event horizon with a radius of 3 kilometres. And it's just a linear relationship. Double the mass of the black hole, double the size of the event horizon. But the actual black hole has no size. And it might have 10 times the mass of the sun, or 1 million, or several billion. In each case, it has the same size. Second mystery about black holes, we know from the age of our galaxy that there should be 1 billion black holes in our galaxy.
Wow.
And how many have we discovered? You see, because our galaxy is very old. It has been around for about 13 billion years. And at the moment it has 300 billion stars. So you work out how many stars have gone through a life cycle, and then a star has 2 forces acting on it. The nuclear fires pushing out and gravity pulling in. And when the nuclear fires go out, gravity sucks it down to 0 size. We know there should be 1 billion black holes How many have we discovered? 3 dozen. Where are they? We don't know. But here is a strange prediction for you. And remember, it is very difficult to make accurate predictions, especially about the future. So I could be wrong, but this is my guess. Think of these 3 things: black holes, dark matter, which makes up 25% of the mass of the universe. We don't know what it is, but we're very sure that dark matter exists. And dark energy, which makes up 70% of the mass of the universe, and we don't know what it is, but we are very sure it exists. Here's my prediction. By the end of this century, our children and grandchildren and nieces will be playing with one of those as a toy.
By the end of this century. Wow.
That's my prediction.
Well,
I could be
fingers
wrong.
crossed. But that's a good prediction, so let's look forward for a positive future. And of course, when I said that you're from Australia, a lot of kids were interested in kangaroos because we don't have them in Lithuania. Obviously, it's too cold for them probably. And why do kangaroos carry the babies in their pouches?
Well, when the sperm and the egg meet, you end up with a fertilized egg, and it splits, and it gets from 1 cell into 2, into 4, into 8, and it keeps on going, and various things happen, and you end up either with a dinosaur or a bird or a crocodile or a snake or a human or a mouse or anything. One way of delivering the baby into the world is just to make these little small eggs, and lots of them. And fish do that. And I've actually been on the Great Barrier Reef to see the coral spawning. And there's just this mass of eggs as far as the eye can see. Eggs. And they're just rising to the surface. They're about 1 millimetre in size. Very rare. Well, not rare, it just happens once every year. You just have to be there. So that's one way of having the babies. Another way is to have a small number of babies and lay eggs. And then all you have to do is just keep the egg protected, and eventually things will happen inside. And another way is to give birth to a living baby. So the baby is born. And in most animals, except for humans, the baby is pretty well able to move and walk around within a day. But with humans, we've had our brain grow in size from 600 millilitres to 1200. And that's created a whole bunch of problems, and the brain has to mature. So human babies are pretty well will die unless you look after them all the time for the first few years. And then you have the kangaroo, and it's somewhere in between. And so the kangaroo gives birth to a baby. Here's the difference. The female Western red kangaroo has 2 uteruses and 3 vaginas.
Oh.
And you can have one baby growing in the uterus and another one much further along, and then it can have a baby in the pouch. And if things go bad, if there's not enough food, if there's a drought, somehow, and we don't know how, the babies that are growing just stop growing. They don't die, they just stop at that stage until there's food. We don't know how. But when the baby is born, it has to crawl out across the mother's belly and get into the pouch and then suck onto a nipple, and then the nipple expands inside the baby's mouth so it can't let go. It's stuck. It has to stay there until it gets big enough. And so you can also have what we call a joey, Joey, which is a baby kangaroo, anything from about this big up. And the female kangaroo can be feeding 2 babies, a joey that's stuck onto a nipple, and another one that's jumping in and out, and they each get a different milk. and we don't know how.
Wow, science and nature is amazing. And another interesting question sent to you from a kid actually. Is there any material that we know of that would stay unchanged in the sun?
Maybe dark matter. I just suddenly realised with the kangaroo, I forgot actually to answer the question of why. And here is the answer. Evolution does not have to be perfect, just good enough to have babies. So evolution tried many different pathways. And in some environments, eggs are better than live babies or better than marsupial. Yeah. So for different environments, some are better than others. Is there any material that could survive inside the sun?
Yeah.
Maybe dark matter. Now, we know that dark matter exists because it has mass. We have no idea what it's made of. Maybe dark matter could survive in the sun. We don't know. But that's my guess. If there is anything that could survive at the centre of the sun, it would be dark matter. And at the centre of the sun, you're joining together a hydrogen atom and a hydrogen atom, and you fuse them together to make one helium atom, and a lot of energy is given off. And then 3 helium atoms are shoved together to make one carbon atom, and a lot of energy is given off. So stars are machines that make elements of the periodic table, and if anybody can pick the mistake in my shirt, we will send them a complimentary autographed copy of my latest book. But the trouble is the mail is very slow and takes about 2 months to get all the way from Australia to Lithuania.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that.
But it's worth the wait. So, and I feel like at this moment, when we spoke about dark matter a couple of times, we should mention a wonderful scientist, Vera Rubin, who proved that dark matter exists. Unfortunately, she died, but I would be very interesting to hear what would she say about this, how would she answer this question. And going to another question, us in Lithuania, like you mentioned when we started this episode, we are freezing at the moment, and we haven't had such a cold winter in actually quite a while. I can't really remember when we had like minus 20 degrees outside and a lot of snow and so on. Do we know why this happened, and does human activity have something to do with this, and how will it be changing in the upcoming years? Will it be getting worse or better?
We are very confident that we know the cause, and it is cold air that is normally trapped in the Arctic being released. Now, think about a refrigerator, and just because you are a curious person, you put the refrigerator in the middle of the room, and it works perfectly fine. The room is warm, and the inside of the refrigerator is cold. And then, for an experiment, you open the door of the refrigerator, and all the cold air comes out. That is what is happening now. The cold air that used to be in the Arctic is released and is flooding over Europe and Asia and the United States. And that is why it is so cold. What is keeping the cold air trapped? A spinning wind going around and around and around. You have one set of such spinning winds. It's called a polar, P-O-L-A-R vortex, V-O-R-T-X. You have one at the North Pole. It's a little one. And then down at the South Pole, you have a big one because Antarctica is so much bigger. And concentrating on your part of the world, the winds going around and around and around the Arctic trap the cold air inside. But global warming has changed the weather patterns and the climate so that instead of having a circle like this, it looks like this. So looking at it from above, instead of looking like that, a circle, it looks like this. And the air up there floods out across Asia and America and Europe. And you're in Europe and you're getting this cold air. So at the moment, the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, mainly carbon dioxide, but methane helps, trap heat. Heat from the sun. How much heat do they trap? 400,000 Hiroshima bombs, atom bombs per day. So this heat per day. And you can do that for one day or a week or a month or a year or maybe a decade. But if you do it for several decades, 400,000 atom bombs per day of heat, if you do that for several decades, you begin to interfere with the global patterns. Luckily for us, 93% of the heat goes into the ocean. Unfortunately, it goes into the ocean, and that's why we're having bleaching of coral reefs, blobs of hot water, massive amounts of heat there. But if it did not go into the ocean, the air temperature on average over the whole planet would be 35 to 40 degrees hotter. So a summer day of 20 degrees centigrade would be 55 or 60.
Wow.
And the reason that it's not is that the heat has gone into the ocean and the ocean is warming up. Will this continue to get worse? For a little while, it will get worse until finally the ice is melted at the Arctic and then there won't be any cold water. Now here's the cold air to be trapped, but here's the good news. Number one, with the technology we had in 1990, we could stop putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And with the technology of 2010, we can actually pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. This is all in my next book. There's nothing stopping us from putting this into action, from reversing, firstly stopping and then reversing global warming, except for the massive disinformation campaign, propaganda campaign by big fossil fuel. Now here's something weird. In the 70s and 80s, big fossil fuel, Exxon, Mobil, etc., they did most of the good research into climate change, into global warming, into the greenhouse effect. And then in 1990, they suddenly changed and covered it up. And by 2013, we're spending $1 billion a day on telling lies and buying politicians. And so all we have to do, I've got a very cheap cure, all we have to do is bribe the politicians. That's illegal, you're not allowed to do that. No. But and make them come the other way, or vote for better politicians. In Europe, your politicians are so much better than the ones in Australia and in the USA.
Also, it's important, the knowledge is important, that people know that global warming is a real thing, and we, as humans, we are directly impacting the speeds of global warming, and we have to know that this is not a discussion, it's a scientific fact, isn't it?
It's like trying to say, I do accept the 6 times multiplication tables. Did you study them in primary school?
Yes.
Yes, so 6 by 2 is 12, yes. And you accept the 8 times multiplication tables, but you do not accept the 7 times multiplication tables. That's exactly what the climate denialists are doing. We proved it was real in 1990. Anyway, let's go on to, so the good news is we can stop it and reverse it, and the sooner we start, the sooner we fix it.
Yeah.
Okay, next question.
Hopefully we will start sooner. And my next question is, I mentioned it in Lithuanian at the beginning of the conversation. You were not able to understand it, but the question is, why do some people make this noise, a grunt, when they do some physical activity, like sitting down or standing up?
Well, one reason is that for some people, parts of their body actually hurt, so they make a noise, or maybe just moving around hurts, and that's always at the beginning of an activity, or maybe It is an attention-gathering behaviour. Look at me, look at me. I can stand up without having to be helped up. But the real reason is the Valsalva manoeuvre. V-A-L-S-A-L-V-A manoeuvre, where you hold your nose and then you go and you push hard and you can feel your eardrums pushing outwards. And you also make your tummy muscles stiffer, harder. So if you lie on your back and then just press your finger into your belly, it sort of goes in, bloop, and then you do this, and then suddenly your tummy wall, your stomach wall is stiff. And so this is what people do when they don't do enough yoga or Pilates to have a good central body core. So the advice there is that if you do yoga, you'll probably stop doing it. And you can tell when you're getting too weak, when to do something like read a book and turn the pages, you have to make a noise.
That's funny. I would love to see a person like turning another page and making a grunt or a noise.
And in tennis, making the noise, besides upsetting the opponent, stiffens their body and they can serve the ball a few kilometres per hour faster. It gives a slight advantage.
Another question about language, because English is your native language and it isn't my native language. Does language affect our thinking capability, and does our intellect somehow depend on our native tongue?
Our languages, for most of us, for most countries, are so developed that it doesn't lead to any real difference between us. Secondly, the field called mathematics is simply another language. And if you want to understand why the sky is blue, you have to study mathematics and do an equation called Rayleigh's equation. And when you do it in this other language called mathematics, suddenly you can see the answer come out. Thirdly, there is a famous book in the English language called 1984 by George Orwell.
A very good
book. Heard
book.
of that book?
Yes,
Yes.
very good book.
So in that book, they try to simplify the English language so much that there are no words for bad or rebellion, and so people cannot think that. And they try. If that actually is possible, we don't know. But in general, you can, in any language, you can win a Nobel Prize.
We have some time left for 2 more questions. Unfortunately, we won't be able to answer all of the questions that were sent in, but one question was popular in particular. What does science know about ghosts?
We have zero proof that ghosts exist. We have zero proof that any paranormal abilities exist, such as being able to read a mind, in other words, know what another person is thinking, or be able to lift something with the power of your mind, no proof that that exists, or being able to know that somebody is looking at you. And often people say, I was sure that somebody was looking at me, and then when I turned around, they were. But what about all the times when you turn around and there's nobody looking at you? You forget them. So with ghosts, they might be real, but as of the 9th of February 2021, we have zero proof.
So good news for people who are scared of ghosts. And my last question, since 2020 has just ended, what would be your top science highlights of 2020? What would you mention? What was the most exciting for you?
Okay, look, I just got one more thing on ghosts. I suddenly remembered.
Oh yeah, of course.
If you aim sound at a very low frequency at people, or electromagnetic radiation, and you flood it into their brains. In some cases, you can make them think that their right arm is moving when it's not, or that there is a ghost just floating in their field of view. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Favourite discoveries. We've found bacteria that seem to have survived in the mud on the floor of the ocean in a sort of hibernation, not dead, not alive, for 100 million years.
Wow.
We also discovered that we've found another planet in another solar system being formed, and then it seemed to vanish, and we think it was, we don't know why. We've discovered that human facial expressions, like smile, lifting your eyebrows in quizzical, seem to be universal across cultures. How much longer have we got?
We have a couple of 4 minutes.
Minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. So David Attenborough tells the story of looking for a very remote tribe in New Guinea, which had never been in contact with Westerners, or even the local tribes around them. I lived in New Guinea for a while, and each valley has its own tribe, who are different from the tribe in the next valley and speak a different language. And so there was one particular tribe that nobody had ever met because they were very fierce and they just wanted everybody to keep away. For some reason, he wanted to go and see them. So they travelled into the tribe area and didn't see them, and they went to sleep, and he woke up in the morning and there was a spear at his neck. And everybody was awake, and everybody had a spear at their neck from this very fierce tribe. And there was no language that they could speak. They didn't speak any of the local languages around. And so he's staring at this rather fierce person, and he thought, what can I do? And then he thought, I'll try lifting one eyebrow. And he went, and then the other guy went, and then they began to talk with their facial gestures, and they smiled, and they didn't get killed, and it was a happy ending. We've also discovered that we've had reptiles raining in Florida. And what happened is that there are some reptiles that live in trees, and there was a very, very cold snap, and the reptiles slowed down and fell out of the trees.
And people thought it was raining reptiles?
Well, if you walked under a tree, splot, a reptile lands on top of you. Do you have time for one more question?
Yes. And my last question, actually, it was also sent in by a kid. How many ants could lift an average person?
I'm guessing that an ant would weigh 1 gram. This is called estimation in physics. So as you study physics, they'll say, how many piano tuners do you think there are in Vilnius? 1, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000? And you make a few assumptions and you sort of get a rough idea. Assume an ant weighs 1 gram. Ants can carry 10 times their own body weight, so one ant can carry 10 grams. How many 10 grams are there in a kilogram? 100 of them. How many kilograms does the average person weigh? 70. So 70 by 100, 7,000. So to carry a human, I reckon would take between 1,000 and 10,000 ants.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Karl, for your time again. Your answers were really, really amazing, and thank you for these amazing almost 45 minutes. O aš noriu padėkoti visiems, kurie siuntėte savo klausimus. Tai tikrai nėra paskutinis kartas, kai mes pasijungėme su Dr.Karl. Jeigu jūsų klausimas nebuvo atsakytas, tai tikrai mes padarysime kitą kartą. Ir ačiū tiek, ačiū, kad žiūrėjote. And thank you, Karl, for being with us in Vilnius again. See you next time, hopefully.
Yes, it was a great honour. I look forward to talking with you again and sending some books to you.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Bye. Iki, viso gero, ačiū, kad žiūrėjot.